the hypertechnology of an ancient civilization that we should all know of. A veil of mystery still covers the depths of history, arousing imagination, curiosity, and scientific interest. Ancient mythology, ancient rock paintings, the Abydos hieroglyphs of ancient Egypt, strange references to historians and chronographers of those times, but also modern scientific evidence that comes to give another meaning, or something confirms ancient beliefs, create a diverse ensemble that faintly conveys the depths of the centuries, the strong pulse of an ancient civilization, which for the most part remains even today unexplored and unknown. Perhaps it would not be utopian to try to find behind the allegory of myths the end of the thread that leads to an unknown truth. After all, this same utopia, quote-unquote, led Schliemann, the archaeologist, to discover ancient Mycenae and Troy. Evans discovered the palaces of Knossos, etc., of the Minoan Empire. So the ancient myths, where they are Greek or Persian, Indian, Egyptian, Mayan, etc., according to several scholars, convey a perception that seems absurd to us, that human history did not follow a linear course from a primitive civilization to a more advanced one, but conversely, a spiral course from an ancient advanced civilization to a continuous decline until the time of that mythological record, and then began to rise again. Okay? An ancient cosmocracy. It's typical of Hesiod to be recorded in Works and Days, where he states that the gods first created the golden nation of people who lived during the reign of Saturn in the state of heaven. This genus was the wisest and most advanced of all, and then followed, in a continual decline, the next genera reaching the lowest, the Iron Age. Here we have the perception of the reverse course of human civilization, but also a reference to some ancient advanced civilization. In the state of heaven, according to ancient Greek tradition, Uranus was the first king to create a world state. The prosperous Messenian states that Uranian is said to be the first of the kings, while Apollodorus states that he was the first to conquer the world. We have a similar record from the ancient Chinese tradition, where according to the ancient text I Ching, the first king was Chang Ti, which translates as the king of heaven. According to I Ching, during his reign, laws of usefulness and justice were enacted. There was no place on earth that did not belong to King Uranus. Similar references were found in the ancient Indian texts Rangu Vansa and Ramayana, which speak of an ancient kingdom founded by Manu, the first of the kings, and in which an advanced civilization may have developed. An ancient Indian text, Popol Vuh, mentions the existence of ancient times of a world civilization while talking about the colonization of America by the white soldiers of King Elataki. These similar to identical ancient records, coming from peoples living in terribly remote areas, can only raise the suspicion that there was then a state that had conquered all, or at least most of the planet, creating an advanced culture. This civilization remained in the memory of the people even after its destruction, probably from a world war and a great flood, events that are recorded again in the texts of the ancient peoples, and its glory was so great that the protagonists of taking on or over the centuries dimensions of gods and events that led them to take on the dimensions of a myth by word of mouth. The reason for the deification of these persons can be easily understood by a reader of ancient texts, since many chronographers, historians, and writers of that time speak of the gods and describe the events of their lives as if they were historical figures and historians' facts. Unfortunately, we have not received a detailed record of the history of that ancient civilization. One of the reasons is the disappearance of the vast majority of ancient records, with the burning of the libraries of Alexandria, Constantinople, and other areas, which deprived us of a valuable treasure of knowledge. It's worth remembering that the library in Constantinople, Istanbul, was on fire for a whole week. It was burning a whole week. Only this information causes us to tremble when we consider the amount of extent of the written documents and monuments that have disappeared from that fire alone. Nevertheless, some sporadic reports have reached the present day, which, in combination with various paradoxical archaeological findings and various findings of scientific research, can faintly convey the pulse of that civilization. So the purpose of this article is not to represent the history of that time, but to convey a portion, as limited space can allow, of the many elements that remain unexplained, or at least incompletely interpreted by conventional history, and if they don't prove it, at least raise the suspicion of the existence of a culture perhaps more advanced and sophisticated than ours. Indications of high technology. It's natural that the history of the civilization that is estimated to have existed 10,000 years before the birth of Christ and disappeared from a cosmogenic catastrophe was shrouded in the fog and glamour of myth, which is the most important indication of its existence. The generations that lived in the years following the catastrophe were divided into people of the priesthood, who possessed the ancestral knowledge along with some of the rest of the ancient technology, and the great mass of the common people. The memories they kept from the years of prosperity, surrounded them with a protective cover of mythology. Let's remember here also the Antikythera device, where the ancient Greeks were able to locate or know when a certain constellation would be coming by. Now, mythology is replete with references to the terrible weapons of the gods. And let's again now remember the lightning rod of Zeus that was supposedly given by an Atlantean to Alexander the Great. A copy of it is in a Nepal Buddhist monastery. Mythology is replete with references to the terrible weapons of the gods, their flying chariots, automatic machines, and war monsters, the magic forces that build huge buildings or demolished invincible walls, the travelers of the sky and the stars. Surely all this can be creations of the imagination. But this fantasy is similar, almost identical in different people, as long as there are archaeological finds that cannot be adequately explained if not considered as a reflection of the reality hidden by the myths, since there are historical testimonies that suggest the use of various critical times unconventional with the data of the ancient technology, and as long as modern researchers based on ancient evidence construct things that until now we consider to be objects found only in myths, it's therefore natural to suspect that mere fantasy is not a satisfactory and sufficient explanation. Ancient myths and texts are full of references of flying vehicles that were used for various purposes. No matter how many of them we record, we cannot fail to have left a significant number outside. However, it's worth mentioning some typical cases where a suspicious researcher can discern many things behind the allegory. A typical example is the myth of Triptolemus with the goddess Demeter. It's a myth of the Eleusinian mysteries, according to which the goddess Demeter, after wandering with her flying fire chariot. In addition, the cultural work that Triptolemus undertook to carry out with the means provided by the goddess is recorded in the mythologies of other people. We quote characteristically from the book by Will Durant, The History and Culture of China, the testimony of the Chinese tradition. Quote, "Before the heavenly kings came, people in China lived like animals. They were covered with animal skins, fed on raw meat, and did not know their father. When Fu He came, with the help of the highly educated queen, he taught the people about marriage, music, letters, and painting. He also taught them to fish with nets and to breed silkworms. After the death of Fu Qi, his work was continued by Zheng Mung. He found the plow, the agriculture, the trade, the medical science, and how to treat people with herbs," end quote. We have representatives of the chariot with the winged dragons and a multitude of ancient vessels. We find such a chariot in the tragedy of Euripides' Medea, on which the tragic pedophile leaves at the end of the play. This kind of directing interventions aroused curiosity, since their theatrical performance was very difficult for the time and would certainly cause many problems. The obsession of the creators, and especially of Aeschylus, in the use in the theater of winged chariots, flying people and animals, but also strange clothes, with characteristics the famous hoofs big boots that strongly resemble those of today's astronauts, indicates the desire of the tragedians to become faithful according of myths, or at least the attempt to indirectly convey to the public some hidden truths without one case invalidating the other. In the tragedy of Aeschylus, Prometheus Bound, we see the ocean and his daughters coming to Prometheus, leading with the will, without bridles, a four-legged bird. In the excerpts that survive from the tragedy Sphinx, we see him talking about a bird that has a night hand, the warlike, and the pole, while in Agamemnon the command is typical: the dogs, the brave, where they fly to the old man he left. The possible obsession of Aeschylus to reveal some secrets to the spectators can explain his persecution from the priesthood of the time with the accusation that he brings on stage the secrets of the Eleusinian mysteries, and perhaps his unsolved murder. The four-legged bird mentioned in Prometheus Bound is found in many ancient depictions as well as in the texts of various people. A typical passage in Ezekiel's description in the Old Testament, where he speaks of an animal with four limbs, and their legs straight, their wings, their feet and sparks as glittering copper, and their wings light. The vehicle was seen by the prophet coming out shining all over through a cloud of dust. Austrian engineer J.F. Blumrich, who worked at NASA and was awarded the Exceptional Services Medal, throughout thoroughly researching these descriptions of Ezekiel of the Old Testament, and designed a state-of-the-art spacecraft with a spacious landing gear, all the characteristics described by the prophet. He published the result of his book in a book entitled "And the Heavens Were Opened." This, of course, raised the question of what the vehicle that Ezekiel saw could have done with the technology of a civilization that was supposed to have been destroyed some 7,000 years before him. So perhaps some remnants of this high technology were saved, even after the disaster, guarded with all secrecy by the priesthood. Only some of the initiates of the ancient mysteries knew about them. In addition, facts that stems from tradition but also from the texts of ancient writers is the travels beyond the earth. There are many references to the myths about the solar chariots with which various heroes traveled, with the most characteristics being the myth of Phaethon's journey. Even the references to astronomical subjects of various mysterious philosophers go beyond the limits of knowledge, which according to the conventional history should have. Characteristic in the reference of Socrates' Plato Phaedo, where he talks about the spherical shape of the earth, describes it as visible from above, and says that what we see from heaven is not the real one, but when we come out of it, out of the atmosphere, we see the true image. A series of ancient rock paintings raise the questions of the bona fide researcher whether what's said about space travel of the time are not just fairy tales. Some rock paintings, if seen and interpreted in certain ways, present astronaut figures. Such have been found on Mount Paigio in Thrace, in Val Camonica of Italy, Kimberley of Australia, and many other places. All these unexplained facts for scientists are an important indication of an ancient advanced civilization. Was there also an ancient nuclear holocaust? And I'll go into that in another video because this is very long. Please leave your comments and thank you for support. I've translated this for you from a Greek article. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.